Order, order. The sit-in is resumed. I call Mr Brian Donohoe.
I'm grateful to you, Mrs Royerton, and good to see you in your place. I know you've got a great interest in pensions, as have I, in terms of the fairness of the system and trying to apply a fair system. And over the years, indeed since I was a very young person, I've always accepted that pension provision is part of deferred income, and as such should be treated by employers as well as government as such. And in all my life I've believed in fairness being applied to the whole question of pensions. And it's that's at the bottom of this debate in many respects, is the unfairnesses that there have been over the years, a great number of years, as far as the application of the state pension itself is concerned. And I wish to commend the government for some of the changes that have been made in terms of the pension scheme, which makes it much simpler than it was, but still has a long way to go in terms of where we would see the future as far as the situation is concerned in terms of some of the elements. And I'll cover that. But first of all, I come to the Chamber mainly on the basis of many constituents coming to see me virtually complaining about the system that they find themselves in. None of them, the three that I have to make mention of, are after anything themselves. They all accept that they're at an age where nothing further can be done for them. But what they would want to do is to by making themselves available to public scrutiny, that they in that sense will help and protect those that follow to having a more even level playing field as far as the situation is concerned. The first that I want to talk about is Anne Aiken, a constituent of mine for some time, who, like the other three, have worked since they were 15 years of age, and from 1967 working in ICI in the local area through various jobs, then went to knitwear from ICI, worked there for a period, and then took 5 years off her employment to bring up a child, her first child. Then after that worked in shops and factories, and then went to a local computer company, Fullerton Fabrication, and has worked since then in Crown Paints for some 22 years. And on retiring, and indeed retires this Thursday. So first of all, we want to congratulate her for that fact, but also to bring to your attention what she sees as an anomaly within that whole period of never having put her hand out for any form of government assistance other than what credits there were for the times off that she took. And that would be in connection with the additional state pension, where she has got a calculation that shows, and obviously by virtue of being a very friendly person, has talked to some of her friends and discovered that in actual fact her additional state pension is less than that of somebody who has never worked. Indeed, she receives something like £16.22 for that additional state pension, when others that she knows is earning £21 for that additional work for the pension that is undertaken. And so therefore, you know, while she took 5 years off, she didn't get any tax credits. There was no such thing in being, yet she's the one that's facing the penalty. And what she asks is a question, it's quite a simple one. What rewards was it for her working? What rewards has she had for all the years that she's given in terms of the situation that she finds herself in, and what she would hope wouldn't be repeated in future? And that's what Anne is concerned about and why she has raised the particular question with me. The second person I would want to talk about is a Jean Dixon, another constituent who has come to me in connection with her position. And she has again worked from 15. She's been involved in terms of working all of her days. She sadly lost her husband in 1998 and was very grateful for the pension that she received as a consequence, a widow's pension as a consequence of that. But she has worked all her days. Indeed, she even took 5 years out to improve her educational standards and was latterly employed as a nurse in acute surgical in the acute surgical area of the hospital. And this is again a situation where she says, look, I've got a state pension, I'm very grateful for it, it's going to be £566 per month. In addition, because of the occupational pension, she's receiving before tax £240 per month. She receives, as a result of her husband having a pension, some £300 per year. And as a consequence of this unfairness that there is, and I want to make mention of in the latter stages of this presentation, she receives £166 per annum for SERPs. So therefore she is in a situation where, while she's been paying in terms of the latest job that she had, 6.5% of her pension towards superannuation, she still feels that there is an injustice in terms of the situation where she finds herself. Well, she has retired in October 2012, that she's in a position where she's being penalised for working all of her days against those who perhaps weren't. The third case I would want to make to you is about Lawrence Clark, who came to see me. And his case particularly caught my imagination in terms of, again, an individual started working at 15, which is when people like myself and my colleagues started work of our age group. He started in Heisters, a local company, as a trainee accountant, went on through various numbers of companies, Simpson Turners as a toolmaker. He went into Wilson Sporting Goods, another local company where he worked for 25 odd years. He then worked for Digital, a local company that went bust. He then worked for Scottish Golf Cast, which again lasted a few months, and then ended up at Quarriers for 15 years, charity Quarriers. And as a consequence of that, he manages to accrue £97 a month for his occupational pension within Wilson Sporting Goods, £223 per month as a consequence of his work at Quarriers. And in addition, on the basis of advice that he received, and that's another point I want to make in my conclusion, he paid towards a private pension which gives him something like £14 per month. And what he's saying is that, you know, after 47 years, he's going to receive a state pension of £123 per week, and that's from the November next year. That's the November 2015. Now, what he's saying is that as a consequence of all that, and being unemployed, if that's the right terminology for him, up until that point, he gets £60 a week for his pension credit guarantee, where others, apparently, and this is what he's saying, are receiving £140. Now, if he hadn't paid into a scheme, a superannuation scheme, where he says he's paid in something like £30,000, he's indicating as a consequence he would be better off per week at the present moment until he retires. And that seems to me to be a very unfair situation in itself, and one that I would think requires to be looked at, where had he not taken out a private pension, where he had not been involved in superannuation, he thinks he would have been better off as a consequence of that, and that is the unfairness that the constituent and the three constituents believe that they face as a consequence of the situation itself. So you have three cases where there are problems in terms of the position in direct terms, in terms of pension provision. But then they look at the other aspects of the life that they've lived against that of others, where others have had free dentists, free prescription for glasses, where housing benefit is part of the scheme, where you've got a situation, maybe changed in Scotland now, where they had to pay for their prescriptions all their life. All of these elements are elements where I'm not saying for a minute that it's wrong that individuals that are unemployed are receiving, but what they say is that maybe they should have get more concerned to the whole question as to how they deal with the situation and how the government deals with the position as far as their own situation is concerned. And it's on that basis that I broaden the argument, because, of course, the difficulty is that in each of these individuals, and it's generally the position, the problem is that the great great mass of people in this country don't have a clue when they're of age 25, 35, 55, as to what provision that they're making to the contributions that are being taken from them, as to what the result will be for their pension. And it's an issue that has plagued me over the years, and still plagues me over the years, as a consequence of the fact that even in here, for instance, there are hundreds of members of Parliament who don't have a clue about what their pension provision is. And I say that as somebody responsible for trying to educate them in that respect. And it is clear that there needs to be a fundamental shift in terms of the provision of information that's given to every individual in this country as to making them aware of the provisions that are available and for the advice that's available. And this is where, again, I commend the government, because at the very least, and on the basis of, I believe, all-party agreement, we now have financial advisors who are, in every sense of the word, independent in terms of the advice that they're giving. And on the basis of what was the position where these individuals worked on commission for individual companies, we are now in a position where these same individuals charge for the service, which at the very least makes it a bit fairer, or it gives the impression of it being much fairer than the position that they were in as a consequence of the position. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I mean, I can certainly remember in the early 80s when people were encouraged to take out a private pension scheme. But unless you worked for a reputable company, the issue wasn't explained to you, how a private pension could sometimes affect your state pension. And there must be, I don't know, thousands and thousands of people in this country in that situation. And I commend the government for at least, whatever our views are about government proposals in pensions, at least they're going to explain it to people. Because I certainly remember working at Rolls-Royce, and they spent a lot of money trying to encourage us away from the state pension to private pension schemes. And to a certain extent, we got reasonable advice, but I could think of a lot of companies like motor car companies in the Coventry area, where even today there's still problems over pensions.
Yeah, I agree. I'm grateful for my honourable friend for giving me, and he focuses on an issue that was one that was dear to my heart and argued forcefully at the time of a previous administration allowing people to contract completely out of their own superannuation scheme within their companies. I was the Joint Secretary at the time of the Scottish Transport Group, where individuals for the first time, I think it was about 1980-82, were given the opportunity of opting completely out of the pensions fund and going private. And I argued forcefully with everybody and anybody that I could that this was a big, big mistake, that they were leaving themselves open so that when they eventually got to the point of retiring, they would find themselves in a different situation to the one that they were. We had, I think, at the time it was recognised as the best pension scheme, maybe not as good as MPs, but certainly a very good pension scheme in place at that time. And these individuals were and are now in a worse position as a consequence of that, because they were pounced upon by those people that are supposedly the independent financial advisors to tell them that they would be by far better off in a private scheme, when indeed it was the exact opposite. I also remember being a convener in shop stewards many years ago, very many years ago, in a shipyard where the blue-collar worker wasn't in a pension scheme at all. And I argued with the employer and managed to succeed to get that employer to introduce a scheme for blue-collar workers. And let me tell you, it's still in my constituency, and I still get individuals coming to me, and that's some 30 years ago, 40 years ago, telling me that it was the best thing that was ever done, that they've never been better off as a consequence of the fact that they took the advice and voted overwhelmingly to join that scheme. And it's again a situation where I think I must be, I don't know if I'd call myself an anorak in terms of pensions, but I certainly look at it on the basis that it's important to have a pension and provision for a pension than it is anything else in your life. And that you should understand that, and I would hope that people would understand that at a very much earlier stage. Now, just to wind up as to what I'm trying to achieve here, I seek clarification on one or 2 points, but I want to also make a plea to the Minister as well. One is that how widely defined is the term employees in the new arrangements? Does it include self-employed carers, unemployed. It certainly excludes, as I understand it, zero-hour contracts, and it also excludes people who have perhaps 2 part-time jobs. And I think that's an unfairness that perhaps should be looked at. And the other thing is that, this new scheme, where I have grave reservations as a consequence of what I've already said in terms of the fact that they're going to be able to take out renewables and go on a world cruise or buy a Ferrari or something. And that worries me, I tell you, because it almost sends the same signal to a lot of people who don't understand pensions, that they're able to draw that money and that they'll be, at the end of the day, a lot worse off. And I would want assurances that they will be protected on the basis of the government's position. There's also one really important point, and that is the financial advice that they get. I think that has got to be clearly stated. And I have had a businessman come to me and tell me that every single businessman in the UK received a letter from 10 Downing Street telling them of the advantages of the latest budget in terms of national insurance from the 6th of April. I wonder if the Minister perhaps could have a word with 10 Downing Street to have it that every single person in this country is sent a letter from 10 Downing Street, where the individual is told just how important it is, how fundamental it is that they are looking after their old age, and also the fact that if they were to die in service, that is also looked at as far as their families are concerned. And if I get that assurance, then I'll go back to my constituents and tell them that this has been a worthwhile debate, and I look forward to hearing what the Minister has to say.
Minister.
Mr. Rawdon, and can I congratulate the honourable gentleman on securing this debate. And I think we have a common interest in quality pension provision, in fairness, as he says, and in making things simpler for people. Because I entirely accept the premise that we've allowed the pension system to become bafflingly complicated. I entirely accept his point that not only do not all of our colleagues understand the pension system, but why should a member of the public understand contracting out and GMPs and all the rest of it? And a central drive of the state pension reform, and I'm grateful to him for his positive comments on that, is to sweep a great deal of that away, is to have a single, simple, decent state pension set at a rate that people will know, that you get for 35 years in the system, contributions or credits, with no contracting out, no differences if you've been in a company scheme or not. That's the world that we're moving to. Now, clearly, his constituents have spent their working life under a very different world. And I just want to say a word about one of the reasons why, certainly some of them, without full details, it's difficult to comment in detail on all of their individual cases, but why some of them might be getting less state pension than their neighbour, think it's unfair, but actually it's not to be unfair because there's something else going on that they're not really aware of. And this is the whole business about what is about to be abolished, which is contracting out. So a number of his constituents who he mentioned by name worked for firms who had a workplace pension scheme. And the principle of contracting out wasn't that the individual decided anything, it was that the scheme decided. So the scheme decided it would be contracted out of SERPS, the State Earners Related Pension Scheme. It would pay less national insurance, and crucially, the honourable gentleman's constituents would pay less national insurance than their neighbour who worked at a different factory that wasn't contracted out. Will you bear with me a second? And then absolutely, I'll certainly give it. So just to be absolutely clear, so you've got two factories side by side. One has a company pension scheme, the other one doesn't. The factory with the company pension scheme that chooses to contract out of SERPS, all the employees in the scheme pay less national insurance than the employees at the factory that doesn't have a workplace pension scheme. So thank you.
Brian Donohoe.
I'm grateful for the Minister giving me. It's not so much the person that's in another scheme that I'm talking about. It's a person that's in no scheme that's got everything coming their way and has never contributed anything to it. Now, I'm not saying, and I stress this point because it's important to stress, the fact is that I'm not making any comparison in terms of saying, well, you have to reduce the amount that they live on. I wouldn't live on £130 a week, and I doubt if you would, but the fact, the Minister would. But the fact is that we're in a situation where that is deemed and seen as being unfair, and if the new scheme is going to overcome that as a problem, then it's a great idea for it.
Well, it will to some extent for reasons I'll explain, but the reason I make that analogy is when the individual is contracted out, they will receive a smaller state pension than they would have done. because they're not building up SERPs, they're just building up a basic state pension. But they're not getting a smaller pension than they would have done because the company is promising to match the SERPs pension that they would otherwise have got. So when somebody retires and says, oh, I'm only getting 16 quid of SERPs, in a sense, they might be getting 0 SERPs, but what matters isn't the SERPs figure, it's the SERPs plus the occupational pension promise together. So they've paid for it, but they've also saved by paying less national insurance. So in other words, compared with someone, I take your point about people who haven't worked, and I'll come on to them, but if we didn't say, when you have a world of contracting out, if person A pays less NI, but still gets the same pension as their neighbour who wasn't contracted out, that wouldn't be fair either. So fairness has a number of dimensions. So, in a sense, the fact that someone can have a £16 SERPs pension in isolation doesn't tell us anything. It depends if they had years and years and years of paying less NI, which is why they've got a lower SERPs pension, but they've got something else, and that's part of the system. Now, he asked about the position of people who've done nothing, and I often hear from pensioners who say, why did I bother saving? If I'd done nothing, I'd get everything. Part of the point of the single-tier pension is to set the value of the state pension above the basic means test, not 30-odd quid below where it is now, above the means test. We then have automatic enrolment, which takes them further above, and as a result, because they have saved, they are clear of the means test, they are better off than someone who's done nothing. That is a new feature of the new system. So we are trying to address that point. Now, he says people who do nothing get stuff for free, and he's not saying that poor people shouldn't get stuff for free, but we can't have it both ways. If we think we have to look after people who've got nothing, and they get free prescriptions because they haven't got any money to pay for prescriptions, we can't then say, but that's not fair to people who work because they don't get free. Unless we give everybody everything for free, we've got to give... well, temporarily they do. But we have to recognise that we do sometimes do things for poor people because it's right that we do, and inevitably there will be an element of people who are working and so on thinking, well, why, it's not fair, I don't get that for free. But as part of a civilised society, I don't want people who've got no income not being able to afford their medicines. It's just the way it is. And if we give everyone free prescriptions and free everything, we just tax everyone to the hilt. So I understand what he says, and the new state pension system will start to address that point by setting the level of the pension above the basic means test. Automatic enrolment will be a huge step forward in the millions of people who may never understand pensions getting a pension. Because the firm chooses it for them, the firm puts them in, the firm puts money in, we put tax relief in, they put money in, and then they're free to opt out, and 9 out of 10 are staying in, which is fantastic. And just as he got the pension scheme extended to the workers, I think, in the shipyard, he said, what we're doing is extending pensions to 10 million people who are just the sort of often low-paid, part-timers, many women, people that, often on the edge of the labour market, who wouldn't have had a pension otherwise. So this is a huge step forward in the spirit of what he achieved for his constituents all those years ago, which will bring millions more in. He asked about the scope of auto-enrolment. It's about employment, about an employment relationship. There has to be an employer to pay the employer contribution. So the self-employed are not in auto-enrolment, but the self-employed do very well out of the new state pension scheme, because at the moment the self-employed Class 2 national insurance only builds them up the basic pension, not the SERPs bit. Well, in our new world, there is no distinction. There's just the pension. So every year a self-employed person puts in future will be more valuable than it is now, because they'll be building up 35ths of the whole pension, not 30ths of the basic state pension. So the self-employed will get better provision. Carers, unless carers are in a contract of employment, will not get auto-enrolled because there's no employer to put them in a scheme. But carers get credited into the 35 years of full single-tier pension. So a carer builds up every year a 35th of the 144 or whatever it ends up being pension. So there is provision for carers in the new system. 0 hours contracts, provided at some point, and most people on 0 hours contracts work 20-odd hours a week, as long as at some point they trigger auto-enrolment, in other words, they earn above the threshold ever, they get put in. So if I'm on a 0 hours contract and I go 0, 0, 0, 0, and then I work 20 hours, in that period, or over a pay period, if I go above the trigger, my employer has a legal duty to put me in. I mean, there's complexities about waiting periods and all the rest of it, but basic principle is I have to be put in once I'm over the trigger. Once I'm in, then if I have a week when I have no earnings, of course no money goes in. But then if I have a week when I do have earnings, money goes in. I don't fall out of the pension. Once I'm in, I'm in. So auto-enrolment happens once, is triggered by earning once above the threshold in a pay period. Briefly.
Jim Cunningham.
The problem I've got with what the Minister just said, as quick as I can, in relation to zero-hour contracts, although you can have a situation surely where somebody will fall below the threshold and things like that because they haven't got continuity of employment. I mean, it's suck it and seize the situation. Well, how would the Minister deal with that?
Well,
30 years or 40 years down the road.
A zero-hours contract is a contract. If you have a contract of employment, then in the weeks or the months or whatever it is, when you're above the earnings thresholds, money goes into the pension. We're not going to insist pension contributions get made in weeks when people don't earn any money, because how would they put money in? So I think the zero-hours contract argument is greatly overdone in the sense that the typical person on a zero-hours contract actually does 20 hours a week on average. Now, it may vary. And then when they earn a lot in a good week, they'll put a lot into the pension, and when they earn less in a bad week, less will go in. But as long as they're actually getting work through the contract, they will be in a pension, possibly for the first time. So I think many people on zero-hours contracts will do better, because actually employers wouldn't generally have put them in a pension at all. We are making that happen. So I think they will do better. People with multiple jobs. There's a small number of people who have jobs which taken together would put them into the system, but taken separately don't. Sometimes there are people who've got children, and if they've got children, then they get credited in the state system anyway. Because you only need 35 years of contributions for a full pension, you can have a number of years when you don't make contributions and still get a full pension. So although I think the House of Lords in about half an hour is about to talk about this issue in the pensions bill, we are going to gather more data on this. We think it's a small issue, but clearly we need to make sure we know what's going on. Actually, the number of women, for example, doing multiple part-time jobs went down in the last 12 months. So the assumption that this is just all going up and going to get worse, we don't think is borne out by the data. But it's a serious point, and we will look into it. He's right that people often don't have a clue. And in a sense, lovely though it would be to think that one letter from Downing Street would fix this, I have two views on that. First of all, we need to make sure that pensions work for people who don't get it and who never will. Because, with the best will in the world, expecting tens of millions of people to kind of understand all this stuff is a heck of an ask. So for me, we have to make sure the system works for people who don't understand it, don't make active choices. That's where the state pension reforms come in. Would you allow me... Yeah, go on.
Thanks. Could a booklet be prepared for people at job centres?
We look at lots of different ways of communicating with people. The thing we know most of all is that if we opt people into pensions and they have to opt out, they stay in. We could have printed 1 million booklets, hand-printed them, I could have delivered them and sat down for half an hour, and I wouldn't have persuaded them. We've used the power of inertia, we've used what we know about how people behave to get them in a way that 1 million government advertising campaigns would just never have done. Now, we are going to include financial education in the national curriculum. That is a good thing. Under the budget measures that he referred to, people will have a guidance guarantee. So before they make their choices, they will have the right to a face-to-face conversation with somebody who isn't trying to sell them anything, as he says. It's not independent financial advice. They can pay for that separately if they want. This is just a conversation that they've never had a right to before that will enable them to make informed choices. If they want to spend some of their pension money up front, it's their money to spend. But we're making sure there's a state pension system in place so that even if they do underestimate how long they'll live, blow the lot or whatever it is, they've got that floor of the state pension above the means test that they don't currently have. I want to mention something else that may be of interest to his constituents who reach state pension age under the current system, which is we are allowing people to top up their state pension if they want to. So if someone has a bit of savings and they want to pay voluntary national insurance under a new category of national insurance for people who've already retired or who will shortly do so. We're calling it Class 3A or the additional state pension top-up. People can pay national insurance and they will get an extra pension for the rest of their life. That will be index-linked, survivors' benefits if they die, and we think that will appeal to a set of people who've perhaps got very low interest on their savings currently, getting nothing in the bank. They'll be able to, from October 2015, and there's helplines and websites and all the rest of it, from that date, make additional contributions and enhance their pension if they wish to do so, and that's another option we've created for today's pensioners. He mentioned the guarantee credit, and the constituent he mentioned, if I understand it correctly, is above women's state pension age, so qualifies for pension credit, but hasn't reached men's state pension age. And clearly in that period, we are saying to people who have no other income, here is an income that we think you need to live on. And if all you've got is half of it, we will top you up to the full amount. Now, clearly, in theory, you could have nothing at all and get the full amount, which I think was the point he made. But bear in mind, conditionality on benefits. We don't allow people to just get job seekers for doing nothing all day. We require, in a different debate, his colleagues might be saying to me, we're far too strict with these folk, we're, sanctioning them when we shouldn't, all the rest of it. The rules are pretty tight. So actually the option of sitting at home all day and doing nothing and getting credits for a state pension is one that we are essentially eliminating. You only get credits for your state pension and so on if you're actively seeking work, if you're applying for jobs, if you're doing the things we expect you to do. So we don't have the system whereby people can just do nothing and then cash in. There are an awful lot of conditions and requirements on people for receiving benefits. So, Mrs. Rawdon, what we've tried to do is recognise the system's fiendishly complicated in the past. We accept that. Simplify it so it's simpler and fairer, particularly to older women, many of whom have done very badly out of the system. Make sure everyone's in a workplace pension as far as possible. Make sure that that's good quality and good value, and put new freedoms but guidance alongside. And I hope as a result of that we'll have a much fairer system in the future than we have had in the past.